Over the last 2 months, we've been collecting and gathering stories and evidence. I initially went into this believing the same narrative that many people believe, namely that my interactions with her, she was a polite and kind person. I had no reason to believe that there was anything unfortunate going on behind the scenes because I wasn't privy to that. As a result of the efforts to raise caps and reduce overloads, I started looking into it because some faculty members asked me if there was anything we could do. And I said, well, I don't know, but I'll look into it. And we discovered in the course of that there were some false statements that the administration had made. There were some claims that weren't true. Their arguments didn't hold up under scrutiny. And so then we started thinking, well, if this is true in this case, is it possibly true in other things that we believe? And so we started digging a little deeper and asking people questions, and I started going to chairs, and I visited with the dean, and people came to me, and I started soliciting information from them, saying, what's going on here? Are you aware of these things? And they would say, yes, I am, and here's some other things you might want to look into. And so we started collecting this information, and people started putting things under my door. I had faculty members who would stick lists of items under my door that they didn't want me to know who they were, but wanted me to know what was going on. I got an entire department that gave me a list of 19 different things to look into. One faculty member wrote an 11-page summary of the things that she was aware of. And I started compiling my own list, and eventually it was 4 pages and about 45 different items. We had emails documenting some of them, statements from faculty members documenting others, financial ledgers, and so forth. And so I think in the end, we concluded that there was no doubt that this stuff was happening, that it was real, that it was serious, and that the university would be better off if that sort of leadership were not present here. So the administration, when they were proposing reducing overloads and raising caps on classes, made some claims such that we needed to do this in order to save an enormous amount of money. But we checked into it and discovered they had not done any calculations on the amount of savings, so they had no idea how much money it would save. Then they claimed that many of the courses were taught at twice the amount that it would cost to hire an adjunct. Well, that turned out, when they finally did the calculations, not to be even remotely true. It turns out that it saves less than $1,000 a class. So they were claiming this exorbitant savings when it just simply wasn't true. They also said that this was necessary to save jobs. She made this sort of threatening argument that if we don't do this, then it will be necessary to fire people. People will lose their jobs. Well, that turned out not to be true either. We talked to the vice president for finance, who's now our president, and asked him straight out, is it true that we have to cut these in order to save jobs? And he said, no, they're separate issues. It's not necessary. She also claims that she never said that this would be taking place in January. She never said that course caps would go up to 50. Well, I talked to people who were in a meeting with her where she specifically made that claim, and they said, no, it was in fact a claim that she made. It was a command, is the way it was described, that this would happen in January. So we were able to show in a number of places like that arguments they made were based on false premises, that she backtracked on claims that she had made and said they never happened when we found out that they did. And so it was because of dishonesty of that sort that we became interested in examples of other dishonesty that might be out there and started investigating. So what we've discovered in this process of gathering this information is that there's sort of two kinds of evidence. There's public things that we can talk about, such as financial statements. We can mention that since she took over from Dr. Hammond, they've raised administrative spending about $1 million a year. And a number of those positions have gone to people that she knew before she came here. So we can talk about that publicly because those are public records. But a lot of the things that we know about and, in fact, can document are things that rely upon somebody somebody's willingness to come forward. Because if we mention that information without their permission, then it would identify who they are. And so one of the biggest challenges we faced in this whole thing is that a lot of the information we know to be true is stuff that we cannot share publicly because it would identify people who may be untenured or people who may be in positions from which they can be removed. And so a lot of the evidence that we know is correct and true and useful is stuff that we can't share. And so that's made it very difficult for us to make this case, and why I think it's reasonable for people to say you haven't shared all this information with us. And that's true, we haven't. And it's because we can't. It's not because it doesn't exist. It's not because we're making it up. The Board of Regents is in possession of this information. They've been receiving letters, and so they know. And so if there was pressure from them, it was because of information like that, not because of bias or dislike of the president. And as I say, when I began looking into this 2 months ago, I began with the assumption that everything she was saying was true, and that she was a good manager, and that she was treating people respectfully, because my encounters with her were of that sort. She'd been polite to me, and I assumed she was across the board polite with everybody, and that I had not seen any examples of mismanagement. I think most faculty are in that position. Most of us do our jobs in our departments and are not really familiar with what goes on in meetings with the administration or what decisions are made behind the scenes. But once we began looking into this and started collecting these stories and did our best to corroborate the stories, we're not just taking people's words for it, but we got the same story from different people independently who were in those meetings and told us about abusive behavior. Or we were able to go to people in the meetings and ask them, is this true? And they would say no, or they would say yes. And so we gathered this information, encouraged people to write to the Board of Regents, and I think as a result of that investigation, we concluded that there was good reason to be alarmed at what was going on. It wasn't that anybody was opposed to her because that she was Hispanic or because she was a woman. It wasn't that she was stepping on a few toes. It wasn't a few people who were disgruntled. Those arguments have no validity to them whatsoever. This is simply the culmination of an effort to discover the truth. And once we found that truth, realized that this was serious behavior that for the good of the university needed to be changed. I think three things were going on. You haven't asked about this, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but prior to any of our efforts, an alumnus wrote the Board of Regents a letter detailing 14 separate incidents of mismanagement and abuse of power. There's no good term to describe the umbrella of activities, but 14 different items, and included a list of people that they could contact to verify these items. And we understand that the Board of Regents chose a lawyer from the Department of Administration who investigated and contacted people in that list. So they've been involved in this before we ever got involved in this, and was able to verify through those contacts a number of items on the list. We got involved as a result of the caps and overloads and people asking us if there was anything we could do about those. And so when we went to the Board of Regents at their October 20th meeting and presented our 20 minutes of complaints, I think what this did is it reinforced the alumnus letter that they had received. And it also opened the gates for people to start sending letters and their stories to the board. I think without that meeting, most of those letters would not have gone to them. Now, they would have been conducting their own investigation, but they would not have seen the breadth and the depth of discontent on this campus. As part of that meeting, a faculty member went around and gathered support for essentially a no-faith statement in the president, and that's where they got 100 different signatories, 17 different chairs signed on to that. So that puts to bed, I think, the claim that this is a few people, a few disgruntled activists who are making these claims, when in fact there is a widespread discontent among people who know what's going on. Now, there are people who still support her. those people have various motives. But I think, by and large, the people who are suggesting that this is some kind of cabal or coup being staged by a handful of disgruntled employees are simply people who don't know the truth.